Right, hello everybody, welcome back to the Wednesday Bike Club. What are we talking about today? Well, I thought it might be worth sort of revisiting the current bike market, particularly around new bikes, because I think there's now, some interesting sort of shifts in power, isn't there, a little bit? And I want to talk a little bit about BSA and the Chinese manufacturers and where everybody sort of sits at the moment and what we may be coming up. Stuff which I think you might find quite interesting, or certainly my point of view of it anyway. Might not find my point of view interesting, but as we do, it's an open forum, isn't it? So people put their comments in and we sort of discuss it between ourselves as a group. So let's find somewhere to park. I've got to try and avoid the rain. The weather's been so windy the last couple of days, so I've got to find somewhere where I'm not going to get blown to bits, and my camera's not going to disappear into the distance as I sneak past this moped. Cool, right, let's go do that. Come on. Right, so here we are. We're sort of slightly out of the wind. If you could see over there, it's as black as you're at. Shocking. But hopefully we'll stay dry. So I better get on with it. So what am I talking about? So I thought it's interesting to look at the current bike market, because as you know, I've said this before, it changes so fast, doesn't it? The way, the shift in, what people are buying, what they're not buying, the problems with dealers and all the rest of it. But I thought it was interesting now to look where we are. We're well into the beginning of what we might call biking season, I suppose. And it's interesting to see where these manufacturers are positioning themselves. Because certainly if we go back and look at, say last year, the year before, we obviously had this trend with companies or buyers looking towards those lighter bikes, haven't we? And the BSA is sort of classic case in point, isn't it? But we still see that trend. I don't see that changing, and I still see manufacturers sort of trying to get a little piece of that market. Now it's interesting where, if you look at BSA for instance, BSA really threw a disruptor into the market, didn't they, last year with the Bantam, and that seems to be continuing, because this still is one of the best selling bikes of last year as far as I'm aware, certainly the back end of last year. And it continues to do so, and I think companies like Enfield will probably be a little bit shocked by that, and I think maybe even BSA was shocked by it, because the sales figures for this bike have been extraordinary, and in sort of terms of what we do sell in the UK, and it's proved itself at the moment. I know we've not had a huge amount of time, but it's proved itself to be reliable. We've not seen any bad publicity around any issues around the reliability of this bike, which is fantastic. And I think that's going to continue. I think we're going to see, if we look at BSA in general anyway, I think we're going to see quite a big jump in BSA. I think they're going to bring their negative publicity out around the Gold Star. I think that's going to I think that's going to be quite quickly forgotten, because I have it on fairly reliable information that because of the success of the Bantam, they're going to bring out 2 or 3 more bikes based on this 335 platform or 350 platform engine. I don't know what they're going to be, and that's over and above the Thunderbolt. And I think the Thunderbolt, when it comes out, is going to be another bike that's going to be a big success for them, because people will see the engine here, which is doing really well. And it's it really is proving to be a fantastic little motorbike. When I come to do the comparisons with a Hunter, I'll go through what I think is why this is better than this, why that's better than that. But I think you'll find that if they get those platforms right, you could sort of imagine that they may bring out, I suppose, I don't know, a bit of a cruiser, which is not really my thing for small engines, I think. But I think if they bring out an even more retro style bike, something a bit like a more miniature Bonneville, or something like a a real scramblerized version of this, I think it'd be fantastic. So watch out for those. The Thunderbolt is due, I think, in maybe another month, but I don't think we're going to see it. It is going to be at ABR, but not as a rideable bike. So I think it's going to be a very good back end of the year for BSA. I think their sales are going to show real improvements. I think if they get those little extra bikes coming out on this platform and they get it right, they don't just throw out stuff just to basically get sales, and it's all a bit cobbled together. But I see BSA doing really well this year, and off the back of the Bantam for sure. Be interested to see what happens to the 650 Scrambler. I think it's been so overshadowed by the Bantam that it's sort of lost its sort of momentum, really. So, and it's got really left behind, hasn't it? It's a shame that they sort of slightly messed up the release of that a little bit. But maybe they should do another release. They should do some work on it and do a bigger release, and change some of the bits on it. I don't know, maybe give it a Highline exhaust and stuff like that. But yeah, interesting times ahead for BSA, I think. And how quickly we can forget things, can't we? Some things hang around bad like a bad smell, but sometimes disappear quickly when you suddenly get something really fantastic, like the Bantam come out. So we shall see. In terms of the Chinese, though, it feels now like the Chinese, and I'm just lumping them all together there, that they really did flood the market last year and the year before, and it feels now that with the inclusion of things like QJ Motors, Vosges were always there, and CF Moto, which I'm going to come back to. I think they really consolidated their place in the market, and I think they're going to go even heavier this year in terms of particularly their adventure bike market, which they seem to be sort of pinning their whole thing on at the moment, because the adventure bike market, although I think the big adventure bike market is cooling down a lot, I think that mid-range thing is still quite hot, and we're not seeing the bad publicity for the Chinese bikes in the way of reliability and stuff like that. I know it's still very new, and you don't expect new bikes to be breaking down. We still do have that issue around dealer networks and stuff, but I think people they're either ignoring it because of the value that you're getting, or they're just taking a chance. I think the second-hand values of the Chinese bikes is still very low because of that, and I think a lot of dealers are not going to take those bikes in second-hand unless they're already a dealer in them. So I think that's still problematic. That's holding them back a little bit, and they really need to develop their dealer network and their service centres and stuff like that. So that's quite interesting. But these Chinese manufacturers are really using things like ABR to push their bikes. You had Vosges last year with their DSX 800 Rally. They had a lot of bikes there, and they were pushing those and getting people out to ride them. And I think CF Moto, coming to them, are going to do a similar thing, because they've just done their sort of press release, and there are lots of YouTubers and all the rest of it doing rides on their new 1000cc bike, didn't they, the new adventure bike, and that's been quite well received. And I think what's interesting is we're now seeing a slight hierarchy in the Chinese bikes, and by that I mean I think we're seeing CF Moto as the slight premier brand of Chinese bikes, and then all the others, Vosges sort of in there a little bit just under that, and then QJ Motors and people like that at the sort of lower end, although the pricing is all very similar, isn't it? But I think CF Moto have been quite they've either been clever or just lucky in the way that it's gone, is that the CF Moto 450 MT was in such short supply that it was seen as, they created demand. Companies like Rolex do this. They produce hundreds of watches, but they keep the demand tight, they keep the supply tight. which makes people think that it's a really sought after piece of equipment, which the CF Moto really did turn out to be. And now releasing that 1000cc bike, I mean, you're interested to see how well it does, but I think they will push that very hard at ABR this year. And it'd be very interesting to see which of the Chinese manufacturers, or if all of them, don't really come to ABR with a huge amount of bikes, and I think they will. I know certainly that Royal Enfield will, and they'll be pushing their Himalayan and bikes like that. You know, some of these companies will put 20, 30, 40 bikes at those shows to really push them. But yeah, I think the Chinese manufacturers now are the honeymoon period is slightly, they're coming into that sort of period where they've now got to consolidate their market base. And to do that, I think they've got to look at their dealer networks and their serviceability and repairs and all that sort of stuff. Because I think there's enough good press out there for the bikes that they seem to be now accepted as a sort of everyday vehicle to a lot of people, and a lot of new people coming into the biking world. And now they need to consolidate that. They need to really round it off to show that they are now, you know, if you're going to be looking for a new bike, you'll think of CF Moto, you'll think of Vosges, and you'll go straight to it. So that will be very interesting to see how the Chinese bike market develops further this year and into next year. What about in terms of the mainstream manufacturers? Well, it seems quite quiet to me. Triumph don't seem to be doing a great deal, you know, they're not doing anything particularly new. They're bringing out bigger versions of smaller bikes. You know, you've got the Trident and all that sort of stuff, the 800. They push that quite hard, but that's a slightly niche bike, isn't it? It's got a particular market, but I think there's a lot of bikes in that world. You know, Suzuki with their GSX 800. I can't remember the model now. But, you know, they brought out that retro version of that, didn't they? With that, they played a lot on the 800cc twin, which is a great engine, by the way. But Triumph, I think, is quite quiet. There's nothing new and exciting coming there. They've developed a few more off the platforms they've got. You know, the 400 has got some more bikes in it now, isn't it? So, yeah, they're not doing anything particularly spectacularly new. But we'll wait and see. I think the one that will be quite interesting will be the 400 Bonneville, which seems to be imminent. So whether we'll get that this year or whether it'll be next year, be interesting. But I think that's going to be quite successful. But you can see the prices of all those bikes starting to creep up a little bit, haven't they? They've gone away from that initial "come buy me now" price, and they're all starting to creep up. Which brings me to Royal Enfield, because a lot's now been said in the press about the Royal Enfield bikes starting to creep up in price. And is that because they want to position themselves as a more premium brand, or sort of middle upper premium brand? Difficult to do that. Difficult to do. You know, I know manufacturing costs and things are getting dearer and dearer and dearer. So I think in general prices are going to rise. But I think Enfield have to be a little bit careful that they don't price themselves out the market a little bit. Although they do, you know, now they don't have that retro classic market to themselves like they've had for so many years. Well, it seems like a long time, but it's not many years, is it? Because you've got BSA in there and you've got Honda in there. Honda bring, you know, with their GB350, which was a real sales success. And now you're going to have the 500 four-cylinder, haven't you, and that sort of stuff. So, although I think Honda is sort of playing it safe. So if we come on to Honda, you know, Honda are innovating a lot with their e-clutches and all sorts of things, aren't they? And there's electric bikes in the offing of things, but I don't think that's what people want. I don't think people want high tech. I think there's still a thirst for good, classic, honest, reliable, cheap-ish, but simple to run, own and ride bikes. I don't think people want high tech. I've said this before about, I don't think people want too many rider aids. You know, that's not a turn on for people, is it? I just think people want good, cheap, quality motorcycles at the end of the day. Looking at the other mainstreams, you're looking at Kawasaki, you know, they brought out the KLE. I thought that was going to be far more successful, but I think the research has been a little bit lukewarm for that. I liked it. I thought it was a really nice bike. But there's a lot said around that interestingly, that it's losing out to the Chinese because it doesn't have enough kit in it in standard mode, which I thought would be its selling point. When you look at the Himalayan, that's a fairly basic bike and it sells well. So you'd think that the Kawasaki would do equally well in that respect, but it doesn't seem to have done. Kawasaki also brought out that W230, which I think it's very limited supply in the UK, and I just think it's a little bit too little too late in that respect. So I suppose the other big one really is BMW. What are they doing? Well, the only real major thing that they brought out is the GS450, which seems to be very well received, but it's an expensive bike. They are a premier brand at the top end of the market, and they're selling to their loyal customers who can afford those sort of bikes. But will a bike like that at the price that it seems to be, you know, once you spec it up, you know, you're in the, you know, you're not far off sort of 10 grand maybe. But is that too much for too little? Do you know what I mean? And I think they might succumb to the Chinese a little bit on that, in that they're offering more for way less in that sort of world. So what else am I sort of looking at really in terms of the coming year as a bike market? Well, we see the problems that the Americans are having with, you know, Harley is still sort of in a funny sort of world of pain, aren't they, really? And again, it was a bit like KTM. You don't want to see companies like Harley fail, and they're too big to fail, I think. It's a fantastic heritage brand. They just need a good direction, don't they, really? And someone who really understands what their market is going to be, I suppose. But very tricky for Harley. We see the similar things with Indian, don't we, and those two big American manufacturers. But we'll see how they go. It'd be nice to see a smaller bike, I think, out of Harley. I think a smaller venture bike would work quite well for Harley Davidson, I really do. But we shall wait and see with that. But yeah, I think the market seems quite settled at the moment, unlike the weather. I think when you go back a couple of years in the turmoil we had a couple of years ago in the motorbike market, I think we seem quite settled at the moment. That people are buying bikes. There's some good bikes coming out. I still think that small bikes are the way forward. What would I like to see somebody bring out, which I think would be a phenomenal sales success, is a small capacity twin, retro style. You know, if you had a bike like this and it was, say, a 450, twin pot 450, I think it'd be a fantastic seller. I know it's easier to build singles, and, you know, we all rave, oh, great, single thumper and all the rest of it, but this isn't a thumper. You know, this isn't in the Enfield style. This is a much more urgent little engine. It's fantastic. But I remember looking at and it was a QJ motor, but it was a bike which is operated by Macbor, Spanish company, and I saw it in France last year. They were running in that bike a 410 twin. That sounded fantastic, and I just wish someone would take that engine and put it in a little retro classic like this. I just think a small capacity twin would be a real market shaker. I really do. Move away from the singles and get a nice small capacity twin in there, 350 or 400. I think it would be superb. It's just a shame, I think, that, you know, people go the sort of fairly simple route. But I think it will take somebody like BSA maybe, or I don't know about Enfield, but I think it needs to be water cooled, and I think we need to be moving forward. I think the days of the air cooled bike may be coming to an end. I think the problem with air cooled bikes is getting the emissions and all the rest of it, and I think it's much easier with a water cooled bike. You know, and you can run them a bit more pokey, with more compression, and I think I think water cool's the way to go. You've got a small radiator, and I just think that might be the thing that I'd like to see this year. A twin cylinder 400 or twin cylinder 350. Wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't that be so cool? Right, I rattled on two more, too long. It's going to get busy here and it may get wet. But thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts, what you think about the bike market this year. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care, ride safe.